Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from clinical development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhood. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward.
On today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader, we are going to be talking about the medical office as a key differentiator to funding and investment strategies. We'll be hitting on themes around how to differentiate the medical office and medical functions in an investor strategy, as well as how to really think about a platform versus an asset play and how to think about and message the differences in building out your organization to investors. In our last episode, we spoke with the founder and CEO of Cove Therapeutics, Niren Shah. He spoke a lot about his own personal journey to becoming a CEO, as well as how he's differentiated Cove both on the scientific basis, as well as how he has translated that to his investor thesis. And that'll be the core of a lot of today's conversation, where we're really excited to welcome our founder and CEO, Doug Locke, who himself is an entrepreneur, an investor, and an advisor to a number of startup companies, both in the biotech space as well as across industries, and has been doing this throughout his career. So truly his area of expertise to dive into. So welcome to the show, Doug.
Thanks for inviting me. And it's thrilling to watch you both excel at yet another great skill. But it wasn't lost on me, sitting in the waiting room, watching you both chat with Niren, fawning over the idea of such a dynamic, affable, and capable CEO. So I enjoyed it as well. He is an incredible guy.
He really is. And he's differentiating his business on the idea of the scientific basis and having that core medical and scientific story. But he himself also has gone from an MSL to a CEO, which is an incredibly unique career path. And it really shows in how he talks about the business, how he understands the business, and really understands the science and what's going to differentiate them in their success and how they build their story for investors. As we think about his story and the investor narrative overall, I'd love to just posit the first conversation topic around how do we think about differentiating the medical office as, building that investor thesis. It's something that a lot of organizations struggle with. They struggle with how much to invest in medical early on. How do they think about that as a strategic value add to their investor story? Let's maybe start there, because I think that's probably of the most important things that we could really be thinking about.
Yeah, Niren, I think, did a good job describing how he approached the equation. And, they were thinking through a few dimensions of the investment thesis in total, but also, as you brought up, the medical office. Obviously, against the backdrop of the AAV environment, he was thinking about all the counter narratives to the risk aperture, immunogenicity, dealing with payloads, and they were thinking through that as a business thesis. So I guess the first point, he would probably tease out, and I think he did, think about how to differentiate the model in a way that both the investor community would understand, maybe a scientific and medical team could adopt, but also that will serve the patient community. He brought the patient numerous times, which is great to hear, a CEO talk about that. But converging all those things in an investment thesis and then a fundraising strategy, obviously very challenging. And he talked about some of his thinking of a seed round to A, and what the medical office needs to do. And I guess I'll just flip it back to you, but the medical office is the value driver in that phase, often underthought in terms of its structure because of resource scarcity, not having the right players involved yet. CMO might not be there. Maybe the CSO is around, and the CEO and team is left with, performing all the deltas that what a medical team, if it were stationed, would be thinking about. So, obviously we have thoughts about that process, but that's the challenge. How do you move left to right and, without those scientific resources and medical resources around you, and triangulate the things that we just talked about? That is the rub.
This is something that we hear a lot of our clients, right? There are smaller biotech, some of the smaller biotech companies, the startups. This is the exact challenge they go through, and which comes down to resourcing. And at what point in your experience working with multiple CEOs and CMOs do you see that the bringing in the medical office in a sequential manner, where they actually fully adding value to the process and differentiating process? Where do you see that happening, and when do you think that's the right time to start approaching that, and how do you build that up?
It's a great question. And there's obviously lots of ways of doing it. And, even in our client partners, even in the companies we've invested in, they've done it differently. So there's clearly a lot of paths to success, but, some common challenges, like when to hire the CMO. Niren was poking at this, right? Like giving them time to hire their archetype, their phenotype, the person that they want, that will adopt these cultural leadership. And it's usually bespoke to the company what they really need from that leader. And obviously, we try to tease that out in some of the work we do when we partner with organizations at that phase. But that's a key determination. Like, when are they onboarding that resource? Do they need it at the seed? Should they have it in advance of the A? Generally, yes. And the investors might have a strong hand in some of that stuff, because they pull demand at times for some of those thoughts to be developed, maybe even prematurely for the organization. But there's many ways to bring that to market. Really, I guess and more, especially pedigreed CEOs, they're discovering alternate ways of adding talent to the enterprise that isn't an FTE, but rather skill arbitrage and talents, advisors, board members as proxies. So we're seeing it, a lot of creative configurations, moving left to right on timeline of different types of resources, opposed to thinking everything's within the halls of this organization. Everything's finite, employee related. That is probably one of the most daunting challenges. And for first-time CEOs, they often get coached into that kind of thinking. It's kind of the more conventional, known way of doing it. And I'll tell you, I've had conversations in the last 5 days with two CEOs that they'll never build an organization that way again. The more flexibility they can create in these early stages, the better. And really, they don't want it. Not to say there's anything wrong with the hiring FTEs. Of course, we need to do all that, create the culture, create the company, but maintain flexibility in these early stages as you're advancing the scientific thesis and proving out early data points. So that's a big thing I hear everybody talking about.
Yeah, one thing that Niren spoke a good amount, and I think it's important for us to pontificate on as well, is how much can you actually show when you're talking about a seed stage organization, preclinical asset. It sounds like a lot of the value of the medical office is really being able to codify how much can you bring to investors? What can you tell them? How can you start to think about the value of an individual asset in the marketplace and what the potentiality of that asset is? Or for some organizations, they're thinking much broader. They're thinking about the platform play. And I know we want to dig into that quite a bit as well, but I see the medical office really as the crux of the organization to be able to do those things and to really differentiate what these assets can bring to market. How do we think about the clinical development plans? How do we start to build that full vision of where the organization can and will be, so that there is a core story to tell investors and for them to actually want to buy into? Can we speak a little bit about that? And there's a couple of pieces in there, of course.
It's a great posit. I mean, there's a bunch of, like you said, a bunch of threads. Top of mind is the asset portfolio discussion. And again, I'm thinking last 10 days, 3, maybe 5 discussions with leaders where they're kind of going through trials and tribulations of what their messaging is to the market, about where they're investing their time and use of proceeds and direction of the company relative to development. And Niren poked at this a little bit too. He was pivoting around those types of thoughts of, what to show sustainability in a broader way against multiple endpoints and targets, or focus on the I. And in his case, they chose a very specific direct focus. But still, there's a decision to make on where to invest dollars on clinical outcomes or driving toward clinical outcomes, or kind of investing in proving out the platform itself. And for the seed stage companies, really, they should be focused on having a very discrete message that they're going to prove the platform through something, or they're going specifically after substantiation of the platform. And often they're varying between those two messages. It creates ambiguity in what they're asking for and a mixed message to the people that are contemplating what to do. In fact, Niren, as an investor, I think he echoed that very concern of something he just heard about. So yeah, stick to a script, come up with the value prop, use the medical office to drive the value of the platform orientation or the asset orientation, usually the latter, as a first target to substantiate a seed round, and then engage the investor community and run with it, and bang against things until you're proven wrong.
To your point, then how do you de-risk all of that? Everything you just said is perfect when you're going and everything is happening as planned. And it's always a good idea also have a de-risking also maybe in parallel to thinking about it or a perspective. How do we do that? How do you approach that de-risking early decisions that a company at that stage is making?
I do think that gets in a little bit of what we try to do with some of the client partners in thinking through a portfolio prioritization and really thinking through what differentiates this the platform from a safety, efficacy, payload perspective, and then being intentional about the various resource programs that actually prove out an inflection point. Like they should be thinking about, we need to, if it's about payloads, that's what we need to substantiate. So what are we doing to advance resource consumption to provide data to our prospective investor community? But thinking about that stuff intentionally, lining it up and sequencing it and empowering it. It's no good to have an inflection point, to Kim's question about the medical office, where they don't have the right advisory and proxy array or internal team to go after it. Obviously, that's not a successful path, but sometimes it's identify the path and build the team in parallel and then hit the target. And that's where maybe some of this skill insertion, skill arbitrage can really make a huge difference, because you can't get those 3 months back. So if they've got an 8-month window and they're not making progress till month 4 because of resourcing, that's a real problem. And that's, I think, what the pedigreed CEO is like, teasing out in a different way than maybe some of the, first time through the running a company type situation. Niren is a pro.
Niren had a really great point on a lot of that in terms of de-risking how he's building Cove, where he really spoke about the fact that there are 10 employees. He doesn't have the intention to build a huge organization anytime soon. He's really leaning on strategic partners to help fill key gaps. He's also leaning into his own personal network and his mentors. And I think he called it stacking the cards relative to his board and the people that he's surrounding himself with, to make sure that he has the skills, the expertise, and the experience set amongst the people around him to really deliver against the promises that he's making from an investor perspective and from a vision for what the company is going to be, in the next couple of years and how he's going to get there. So I completely agree in terms of the skill arbitrage and really thinking about kind of building the team around him. He also spoke a lot about how they're differentiating on things like manufacturing and CMC costs, which I just personally found very interesting, knowing the themes of the gene therapy space over the last 3 to 5 years. And prior episodes, we spoke to Suku, who also references a lot of the same challenges that this space is really seeing. So it's interesting to hear manufacturing being a differentiator that's helping to drive down costs, de-risking the asset itself and being non-viral, but then the medical office and really how he's thinking about the team he's building, the skills he's bringing to the table, how he's building his clinical plans, kind of being the third leg of that stool to make sure that the company is de-risked and differentiating the story that he's bringing to investors along the way.
Agreed. As you said, Kim, Suku and Niren, and also the two podcasts both said similar things here. In one case it was, be self-aware. In this case, it's, arbitrage on the people around me to create value, right? Like two different takes on what to do about the situation of a skill gap or just resource gap. People to move both ideas, de-risking constructs, progress with the assets and platform, and engagement of third parties, the investment community, key strategic investors, and the patient community, and perhaps the KOL community. Like how to leverage the people and resources around oneself to advance those things flexibly. That's probably what they would both, say is secret to the success.
And I think another part of also de-risking has to do with the fact, obviously you want to have the experts and you want to have the mentors and the best of the best so you can go in for advice. But it also helps quite a bit if you have the contrary opinion as well, right? That you don't quite see eye to eye on a certain thing, because that also helps you to kind of pressure test your own ideas with the team and to start thinking at multiple different angles when you're approaching something, making sure that you're kind of covering the from a comprehensive approach and a strategic approach, as opposed to just really being single focused on one thing and go without really knowing that you didn't really think about some of the advice that you've been getting through, because they might not have been aligned with your initial thinking. So I think that contrary opinion also helps quite a bit, of course, from the right individuals. And that's something that perhaps we don't necessarily do. That's something that I've experienced, that partnering with consulting firms, to be very honest, sometimes they have the contrary view because they've seen and experienced quite a bit. And that could initially may come across that, well, no, I don't really agree. But when you go a little bit deeper, you realize there may be something there, and it helps you build or rebuild your initial idea and opinions, or your strategy even stronger. Do you guys agree with that? Do you see that? Is that necessary?
I may reframe contrary to more objective. I think having those outside advisors, whether it's your partners on the delivery side, whether it's in-source partners like SSI, or other partners, or your advisors on your board, or your personal mentors, having those objective points of view allow you to poke at these problems from a different perspective, to make sure that you actually have thought about every permutation, the potential scenarios, and the roadblocks that you are inevitably going to hit at some point. I think a lot of the challenges we've been seeing in the industry are people hit roadblocks that they never planned for. It's not that these things aren't going to happen. They are going to happen, but how you prepare for them and then how you deal with them, I think, is a differentiator for companies that succeed and those who don't. So taking that time up front, bringing in the experience set to ask the right questions, to your point, in a productive way, push back in areas where you need to hear it. So having the people that will say the things you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear, and enabling that to help shape the story and the arc of the company is really going to kind of change the game for most organizations.
I agree with both of you. We've all seen it can be a lot of pressure on individuals that are part of a company to not be, in a bit of an echo chamber at times, about the direction they're going. And, to your point, Kim, maybe readiness to pivot because something doesn't play out the way they want. And often people have thoughts about that it's just difficult to escalate. I'm talking more about an extended organization. This is less true in these early stages where a medical office can be dynamic, and where Niren probably is right now, because he's got people with he's surrounded by people with very aggressive points of view. So he's hearing it, left and right, and he's navigating it. It's good to have those voices in the room, like Ramin said. Having that there is, if you don't have that around you, you're probably in the wrong room, because if everyone's saying the same thing, A, not everyone's necessary in that room, but B, we're probably missing some of the dimensions that are going to make the asset, company, and the the thesis better. The people we know that are looking backwards at success would say they had that around them.
From your point of view, we've spoken about a number of different key themes here. The medical office helping to really differentiate the organization, especially as you're going for, whether it's your seed round, your A round, really any funding round at any point. There's a huge value to be had in how you leverage your medical office, and the permutations of the medical office are going to look very different at each one of those stages. What advice did you give Niren a year ago? What advice would you give other entrepreneurs at a similar stage, whether they're first going for their seed, they're going for their A, they've just taken on this role? What could you offer them from your experience in having these conversations day in and day out?
There's really no reason to go through the journey without testing the market for different forms of advisory support and the structures that Niren talked about, and obviously that we advocate for and we provide ourselves. But there's really no reason to go resource deficient during the early. It's probably at this point with the market, with the different types of service orgs, different investors that will come to the table. We will come in and help de-risk an investment, but without talking about us, just taking advantage of the knowledge that's in the marketplace in creative ways. There's no reason to be linear, thinking through the organic team and what we have, and not testing and pressuring that in some ways. So that would be one. And the next would be thinking intentionally about the medical office build. As we move from a seed to an A round, just to advance the company maturity a little bit. often the medical office is fragmented from the corporate strategy, or I should say it's not connected in a way that's accretive to the corporate strategy. This is something we're super passionate about, of course, but there's no reason you can't build a connected medical team that's actually advancing the core milestones of the organization. Due to the dimensionality typically of the CMO, so many functions they have to own. When they're deficient in one of these areas, some companies can maybe write them off from investor relations or whatever it might be, the full breadth of 10 different skills they have to have. But there's no reason not to create a connected medical office that's in parallel with the corporate BD investment relations strategy, that's adding value to the enterprise and is a handshake there.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining the conversation today. Really great insights, and we look forward to having you again on the show soon.
I can't tell you what, it's a thrill to watch two professionals do such great craft work. I think you're both fantastic at this, and thanks to Niren. That is an impressive man. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI Strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.